Justice Beat is dedicated to the 1 in 3 Americans touched by incarceration. Justice Beat is where we discuss all things justice.
Good morning, and welcome back for another installment of the Justice Beat Talk Show. We thank you so much, Justice Beat family, for being in the house with us again. And today we bring to you our guest, Dr. Ryan Tobiasz. He is with Adler University, and our interviewer for today will be Kavan Nakai, our associate producer for this episode. Take it away, Kavan.
Hello, everybody, and hello, Dr. Tobiasz. I just wanted to start out our conversation today by welcoming you and thanking you for joining us, as well as inviting you to share a little about yourself, your background, your expertise, or any kind of specialization you have.
Okay. Well, yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me this morning. I really appreciate being here this morning. I'm Dr. Ryan Tobiasz, and currently I am the program director for the Forensic Mental Health Leadership Program at Adler University. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and I also have a master's degree in forensic psychology. All of my clinical experience has been within correctional-based settings, meaning that my clinical work, my clinical training, my professional work has all been within maximum security institutions, primarily within the state of Wisconsin. I worked within specialized housing units within our maximum security institutions, meaning that I worked within our units that were designated for those with serious mental health issues, primarily those with major depression, bipolar disorder, individuals with schizophrenia or other disorders across the psychotic spectrum, those with significant brain injuries, head trauma, significant post-traumatic stress, anyone who could potentially be vulnerable within a prison setting, meaning individuals who may have an intellectual disability, who may have dementia. With these individuals, I did a lot of work around illness management and recovery. It's a group work based on teaching individuals about mental health related disorders, how best to cope with their mental health related issues, providing relapse prevention plans, and hopefully prepare them for reintegration into the community. In addition to working on our specialized management units, I also worked in our segregation units, doing a lot of crisis related work, a lot of crisis de-escalation, working with a lot of individuals with significant self-injurious behavior, working with other mental health staff on a dialectical behavioral team to really focus on emotion regulation to bring down the self-injurious behavior and acting out behavior that went on within our segregation unit. So that's a little bit about kind of my clinical work. And I've been in academia full-time. Now it's been roughly about 12 years. Prior to being at Adler, I was the department chair of forensic psychology out at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology out in Washington, D.C. And now I've been at Adler for almost 2 years in my current position. So that's a little bit about myself and my background.
Wow, what a resume. It sounds like you've done a little bit of everything in the field. And I was just curious because, a lot of people have their own motivations for getting in the field in the first place. What made you interested specifically in forensic mental health?
Yeah, so it was a journey. I knew I wanted to do something potentially with psychology and or law. I debated law school for a while and then realized that probably wasn't the best route to go. I do come from a family of law enforcement. My dad is a retired police officer for the city of Milwaukee. My uncle was a sheriff for Milwaukee County. So I have a lot of law enforcement in my background. So I had a lot of that growing up. And I heard a lot of stories growing up about what was going on in the communities, about a lot of situations that officers were getting involved in that were related to potential mental health. And so with my interest in psych, I thought, well, yeah, I really kind of thought that kind of getting involved in the criminal justice system would be a really great way to do it and avoiding law school. So that's why I really kind of went this route. I also was really thinking about, for a long time, maybe working in developmental psychology for a while. That was kind of in my map, I guess. I have a sister with an intellectual disability. So I grew up with learning about intellectual disabilities, being actively involved in Special Olympics with that community. And so I just always had psychology, mental health, kind of at the forefront throughout my entire adolescent life growing up and going into college. So that's what really directed me kind of this way.
And it also sounds like you had like an inkling or at least an underlying notion of like social justice, that you wanted to do something that involved advocacy because you were kind of debating law at the same time. And you're also a professor here at Adler University, which is all about social justice to complement the mental health interventions. I was wondering, what does social justice mean to you, and how do you practice social justice?
Yeah, so social justice is a very complex issue. And I think we all have a different perception or idea of our definition of what social justice is based upon our own upbringings, our own backgrounds, and our own viewpoints and our ways of life. But when I think about it, I think about social justice as individuals having equal access to whatever it is. And so when I think about social justice in a mental health capacity, I've seen over time, and again, as a privileged white guy here, I'll acknowledge that I have been granted a lot of resources and just quote things that a lot of individuals from marginalized communities, marginalized neighborhoods, under-resourced neighborhoods just haven't had the opportunity to take advantage of. So given my background, I really wanted to be involved in working with individuals to ensure that they could receive access to primarily mental health related services that they're not receiving. Because it's all for me about equity and accessibility, primarily working with diverse communities. I mean, what we've seen within, just to give you an example, Kavan, I mean, when you think about just the correctional based settings, when we see these individuals coming into our correctional systems who are primarily African-American men, they have not been given the opportunity to work with mental health out in their communities. And their first interaction for a good number of them with mental health clinicians is within our jail and prison systems, which is incredibly unfortunate. So really trying to up our resources within our criminal justice system, which has become our new mental health system, is really, really important at the forefront of kind of the work that I did when I was working full-time in clinical practice. And I think about within education, really teaching students like yourself and others in our program, the importance of being invested in these types of settings for these specific populations.
And you briefly just touched on it right now, but I guess since you touched on it, we can go to the next question, which is, what are the most significant barriers to appropriate mental health treatment for those who are incarcerated?
Yeah, barriers. One, I think, is just access. I think when you think about individuals who are involved within the criminal justice system and court-related services, they do not live within or have easy access to or easy transportation to mental health services that are affordable, that are free. And that's a huge issue. They just do not have, there's just a inequity and disparity for a lot of these individuals to even just have access to a counselor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a social worker. I think that's huge. A lot of these individuals, unfortunately, realize that there's quote like something off or something not quote right about them. And they're trying to navigate their life without the actual support around them, whether it's in education, their education systems, work settings, with their families, and they don't know how to really manage what they don't know. And I think that is a significant issue as well. So unfortunately, a good number of these individuals just don't have the basic, psychoeducation around mental health, physical health, and the interplay of both. So I hope that kind of answers what you were getting at.
Yeah, and I was wondering, because you kind of spoke a little bit about it, a little bit about like the community role, where for a lot of these people, it's their first time receiving this kind of mental health treatment or intervention. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about like what could the community's role be in addressing some of these disparities?
Sure. I think there just needs to be a greater kind of community mental health approach. I think we need more kind of quote boots on the ground at the end of the day. I think we need to have more mental health staff who are going out into the community, who are talking to constituents within these communities about what mental health is and how best to take care of themselves and how best to cope with stress, how best to cope with time management. I think, unfortunately, a good number of these individuals, unfortunately, are coming into contact with primarily law enforcement officers. And I think having members that are trained in mental health along with officers who can have conversations along with these officers and have a more kind of community informed approach around psychoeducation to address all these needs is probably one of the best ways to go about doing that. Come on.
And you also, again, briefly just touched about it, but there's a lot of populations that might have like a natural distrust of mental health in general, whether it's just a cultural thing or it's something relatively new. I was wondering, how would it be best to kind of bridge that gap of authenticity and like increase the trust between like the boots on the ground people who are trying to help and the individuals in the population they are trying to help?
Yeah. One of the things that I think that would be really important that we really don't think about is focusing on spirituality. That's one thing that I've really been thinking about over the last couple of months. And I think so many people turn to religion and spirituality to work through stressful, difficult, challenging times. They turn to their church communities, their church leaders. And I think that may be a really good way to kind of bridge the gap and have connections around mental health with spirituality, because we do know that individuals who are mindful, who utilize kind of mindfulness best practices, spirituality best practices, they can cope a little bit better with their mental health. So I think getting connected with church leaders from a mental health standpoint and having conversations and this kind of team community approach in a lot of these communities might be a really good start with regards to kind of getting boots on the ground, as in addition to kind of what I discussed earlier with being with law enforcement officers for having challenging conversations as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to give a false statistic here, but I believe a large majority of patients in hospitals, they want this sort of spiritual connection between themselves and their doctor, but they don't get it often. They usually get it from their nurses and their social workers.
Right.
So it's very interesting that you bring up that spirituality point. We spoke a little bit about the unique challenges when working with these populations. I was wondering if you could talk about any of the challenges that you faced when you first started working with people with, severe mental health issues.
Sure. So I think a lot of it was, unfortunately, within my doctoral level training, I did not learn a whole lot about working with individuals across the psychotic spectrum. And so a lot of it was kind of learning on the spot and trying to learn what are best practices to engage with individuals with serious mental health related issues, collaborating with a lot of colleagues, having conversations with individuals outside of our correctional based systems and community mental health centers about what are best practices that work out in the community that could potentially be adapted to working with individuals that are incarcerated, because their needs are going to be very different. When we think about, just think about you and I, like if we're stressed out, what can we do? We can go outside and go for a walk, right? We could throw on Netflix and watch whatever we want to stream, if we really wanted to, right? We could go grab, pick up our iPad and read a book. When you think about people who are incarcerated, they don't have those mechanisms to cope with a lot of the stress that they're facing when you think about being kind of locked up in a small little box. So like really thinking about and adapting and being creative and innovative on how do we best adapt best practices, particularly around coping. That was one of the biggest challenges for me, because so many times when I was working in the groups, guys would say to me, Dr. Tobiasz, like, we can't do that. Like you're talking about like going out for a walk. We can't do that. We can sit in our little space and, do some deep breathing, but like we're still stuck in our box here, our room. And so I think that was really challenging. Really, really learning about what is the experience like living within an incarcerated setting, and meeting people where they're at. I think that was one of my initial challenges. Another challenge for me, and I'll be honest too, going in as a young guy and being a white guy, when you think about individuals who are incarcerated, who they've had a lot of negative experiences with people in authority, and as a mental health clinician, even though we're there to help, we can still be associated with people in authority because we're, quote, part of a system, right? And so working and navigating some of those challenges to really develop trust and rapport with the clients that we're working with and trying to understand their lived experience. So many times guys would say to me, Tobias, you're a young white guy. Like I'm a black guy that like lives in the core of the city. You have no idea what it's like for me. And I'd be like, you're right. Tell me about it. Let's have a conversation about it. So really having those initial dialogues and conversations was really, really important to kind of jump through some of those initial hurdles and challenges that I was experiencing.
So kind of like overtly broaching the elephant in the room and leading with your most authentic foot forward really is the only thing you can do.
Exactly. Yeah.
We kind of talked a lot about, the challenges and some negatives. I was wondering if you could talk about any positive therapeutic factors or sources of strength that surprised you while working with incarcerated individuals.
Yeah, I would say what I really enjoyed working within my groups that were related to illness management and recovery was really focusing on individuals who wanted to learn about their mental health issues and slowly develop insight and awareness into their mental health related issues and how that impacted their relationships with others. And when those like kind of light bulbs and light switches went off for those people, that was something that I felt really proud about. Feeling like, yes, we're finally making some progress here and really helping individuals once they learn about their mental health related issues, having those conversations maybe with their family members and opening up conversations that were hard to have with family members, and to gain greater areas of support. So many of these guys said, hey, my family, they don't want to talk to me anymore because of how I act or how I behave, or they perceive me to be crazy or whatever term they wanted to use. But once individuals had insight and awareness and had, quote, control of their illness, those relationships flourished once again. And then also seeing individuals once they were stable with their mental health issues, being able to transition from either a maximum institution that I was working at to a medium, or even getting reintegrated in the community. That was really something that I was really happy to see. And at the end of the day, all of that work is because of the strengths that the clients and the patients were bringing to the table at the end of the day.
You briefly just talked in this last segment some stereotypes surrounding mental health issues. And I was wondering if we could review some stereotypes of mental health and incarcerated individuals, and if you could correct any of these stereotypes. The first one being people with schizophrenia are all violent or dangerous. Could you speak to why that's a dangerous stereotype?
Yeah. And so I would just say, I would even step back and go a little bit more broadly when we hear that people with mental health issues or who are mentally ill are violent. I mean, that's a stereotype that we hear all the time, and stigma, and it's harmful. We know that a majority of individuals with mental illness are not violent, are not aggressive. Are there a few that are? Sure. We've seen that. We have seen that. But as a whole, individuals with mental health related issues are not violent and are not aggressive. So I just want to start very broadly there.
Yeah, I guess, the second one kind of is the same thing, but it's a little bit more broad, which is violent individuals or people who commit heinous crimes have a mental illness.
No, and when we see, so I think this goes to a larger, we could talk about this for a long time too, when we think about a lot of these cases that we see across the media. And the media kind of heightens a lot of these cases where extremely violent crimes, when we think about mass shootings, and we start to talk about the mental health of the individual who has committed such horrific, heinous crimes. And in most of these cases, we know that these individuals do not have a significant mental health related issue. And so like these media cases, I think it's really important for those within the mental health field to get in front of these cases and have conversations and dialogues with people to remind people that individuals who commit these acts are not mentally ill, and mentally ill individuals are not, as a whole, aggressive and or violent.
Do you see any of these stereotypes impacting the work and any of the work you do while you're in the field? Like, let's say with the guards or with administration or with even other professionals?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so when I think about sometimes it's with working with security officers during my time, um, it was almost the opposite. A lot of officers don't understand what mental illness is. And so having conversations and educating even officers, that was part of what I did when I was working in the correctional based settings, is training officers on mental health and mental health related issues, and how do we best work with and have conversations with and interact interpersonally with those with mental illness. Because unfortunately, and I don't want to stereotype, but when we think about individuals who work in these correctional based systems, when you think about just prisons, just generally speaking, they're out in rural areas, right? A good number of them, they're out away from urban areas, they're out in the middle of nowhere, and they typically attract people who like live in those areas. And when we think about people who live in these rural areas, we're talking about, people who historically are who are white, rural, white males who are older, who have limited education, typically not college. And so they're not exposed to a lot of worldviews or viewpoints outside of their small community. So one, they don't know a whole heck of a lot about mental illness. And so it's educating them about that. And to be honest, my experience too is they have not really had a lot of interaction with individuals who are outside their communities, meaning they have never had a lot of conversations or interactions with individuals from um, um, other racial ethnic backgrounds. And so having conversations with individuals just around diversity, around multicultural related issues, really working through stereotypes, biases, prejudices that some of these individuals have, was part of my work as well. So it was like this interplay of talking about mental health and diversity at the same time, and the interplay of both.
Just to give everyone a quick heads up, in about 8 minutes, we're going to do a quick commercial break. But just to get one more question out there, we were kind of loosely talking about these unique challenges that people with severe mental illnesses face when they're in the incarcerated system. I also know that there are specific issues, kind of like individuals who have schizophrenia get diagnosed a lot later when they're incarcerated compared to individuals who are not incarcerated. I was wondering if you can speak more to those specific diagnostic, I guess, issues or discrepancies that you find when you're working with the forensic population.
Yeah. So when we think about, for example, individuals with schizophrenia, when we think about for men, their first psychotic break, when they first really experience a significant amount of symptoms, it's in their early 20s. For women, it's going to be a little bit later, in their late 20s or early 30s. Unfortunately, by this time, a good number of these men may be already incarcerated, particularly when we think about African American men who have unfortunately been through juvenile systems and who are in adult facilities. And so they may have their first, quote, break or first signs of symptoms while they're incarcerated. And again, that they've had no contact with mental health prior to actually incarceration. And so, again, it's all about educating these individuals about their mental health related issue, working with an integrated team approach with medical staff, nursing, with social work, psychiatry, psychology, all together to really put together a really great treatment plan to, assist these individuals during their time while they're incarcerated. And also just to make sure that while they're incarcerated, they're safe, and then the staff are safe as well. Because sometimes we do know that when people who have psychotic episodes and they're hearing voices and who are responding to internal stimuli may act out, again, are not like necessarily violent, but we want to ensure that people are safe when they're around these individuals.
The concept of educating people for the first time, especially in an incarcerated environment, it just doesn't seem like they have the necessary resources. And I was wondering if you could talk about either the resources that they do have or the resources that they don't have when it comes to mental health interventions.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I guess I'd rather go the route of the resources they don't have. The resources pretty much like the limited mental health staff that's there. I mean, and I've talked about this in some of my classes. And when I was working in a maximum security institution, there were like 1,200 inmates that were incarcerated and roughly 5 or 6 full-time mental health staff members. So when you divide that amongst ourselves, what are we talking? 200-300 on a caseload. I mean, come on, who can handle that, right? Now, granted, not everyone on that caseload has mental health issues, but we're still responsible for their mental health and well-being while they're incarcerated at that institution. So it's really, really challenging for us to engage with all of these individuals and provide the adequate care. So there's the limited resources across the board. So, I mean, what I've always said and what I do, like more bang for the buck and how to best better resources is doing a lot of group related treatment. If you can, when you think about these massive caseloads, if you can have groups with individuals, 12, 15 people at a time for an hour, I mean, you can reach so many more people. So I think trying to think about being creative and innovative within our correctional based systems around best practices. If we can do a better job of consulting with people on the outside to come in, so we're expanding our care, so then that can also bridge mental health with reintegration. I don't think we do a good enough job across the board doing that, and I think that's an area that we really should be working on as well.
You briefly talked about some racial discrepancies and a little bit gender discrepancies. And I was wondering if you could go more into detail about any racial, gender, or class disparities related to diagnosing and treating mental health in prisons.
Yeah. So I think a few things. People are misdiagnosed for a variety of different reasons. When we think about black males that I primarily work with, a lot of the misdiagnoses that I was seeing is that we're missing depression. We're missing major depression by a landslide, because we do know that, unfortunately, for men, we see depressive traits come out externally. Typically, men, as opposed to women. Again, I'm talking very generally here. We see irritability, as opposed to the internalized depression that we see most often with women. So when we see women, men who are irritable, we misperceive or misdiagnose this as aggressive, just quote, aggressive behavior or antisocial behavior. So we're not even acknowledging or seeing the depression that a lot of these individuals are experiencing. I think sometimes we misdiagnose individuals across the psychotic spectrum. I think when we think about Black African-American men, just African-American individuals, just generally speaking, who are incarcerated, because of their lived experiences, they are very hypervigilant. They're suspicious. They're on guard because of needing to be in society, particularly when we think about their relationships or lack thereof with law enforcement. So unfortunately, a good number of these individuals are misdiagnosed based on what is natural or cultural paranoia, which is based in reality. They're diagnosed with psychotic based disorders, as opposed to they are paranoid or they are suspicious or they're on guard because they're a Black guy, and they've experienced a lot of horrific things in their life, a lot of trauma in their life. We miss the trauma too. I think that we do miss diagnosing trauma and other stressors because of those same related issues. So I think those are the big ones, particularly that I've seen, the misdiagnosis or missing of major depression, trauma related disorders, and then diagnoses across the psychotic spectrum.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're going to run a quick commercial break, and then we'll be back for the last Q&A segment of our episode. I don't know when it's going to run, but it's going to run sometime soon. I don't want to ask.
Next Generation Media Internship Program, designed for undergraduates, postgraduates, unemployed, dislocated workers, and WIOA participants. Our program offers remote virtual work experiences, qualifying as approved individualized career services. Learn while leading at your own pace, with part-time or full-time hours per week. Benefit from weekly debriefings and group supervision, along with our 15-minute masterclasses. Our projects include the Justice Beat Talk Show and the Just Us Youth Talk Show. Discover your gateway to success today.
Come on. Unfortunately, I think you're muted.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. They muted me when the commercial started. So we briefly were talking about the discrepancies based on demographic and how people are often misdiagnosed. People with depression, or men particularly with depression, because their depression is externalized, they are seen as more aggressive. People with psychotic spectrum disorders are hypervigilant or on guard because of these survival strategies. They're forced to live in a certain way because of this patriarchal, hypermasculine environments. And also, trauma is missed because we don't necessarily have a lot of trauma-informed care when it comes to, like you said, there's only 5 to 6 staff per 1,200 inmates, and those people are probably the only trauma-informed people there. Maybe there's a few other people in terms of, physicians, physical staff. I was wondering in particular, could you talk a little bit more and kind of like specifically define what the psychotic spectrum is for people who don't necessarily know?
Yeah. So when I think about individuals who experience psychosis, so when I think about that, primarily individuals with schizophrenia. So these are individuals who are, for I guess to best define it, are detached a little bit from reality. These are individuals who experience what we call perceptual disturbances, meaning they are responding to responding to internal stimuli, meaning that they are hearing voices that the rest of us don't hear, that's ruminating through their head. Auditory hallucination, or quote voices, is the number one perceptual disturbance that individuals with schizophrenia experience. Sometimes they experience visual hallucinations. They'll be seeing things that others don't see. Sometimes they'll experience what are considered tactile hallucinations, meaning they're going to feel things, like maybe they feel like something's crawling on their skin, and the rest of us don't see that. A lot of disorganized thinking and disorganized speech, meaning conversations don't make sense. They are jumping from topic to topic. Sentences are not aligning. Their thoughts are just all over the place. They're just spinning in circles. When you think about disorganized behavior too, they're typically, when they are not doing very well, you'll see that they're not taking care of themselves from maybe like a personal hygiene perspective. Very disheveled. Clothing is dirty. They haven't showered in a long time. Not taking care of themselves, brushing their teeth, washing their hair, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes these individuals will have delusional beliefs, meaning that they believe things that can be proven false. Like they feel like they're being spied upon, that their food is being poisoned, that the government or the CIA is after them or monitoring them by radio frequencies. Someone's monitoring my mail, stealing my mail, like those types of things. Those are some of the kind of quote classic symptoms. So when we think about, like, to kind of put in perspective from a think about it, like in media, people have seen or read A Beautiful Mind. When we think about Nash, like he was a prominent mathematician and professor who experienced a significant psychotic break, and you could see how his life kind of spun in circles after he had that psychotic break. He's a really, really good example of kind of a film that was Oscar nominated and won, that really focuses on schizophrenia. He sees things and hear things that other people do not.
Speaking of films, I know that you are a fan of watching a couple different films. I was wondering if one of our producers had this question, is if you watched the new series on Netflix called Unlocked, a jail experiment in Little Rock, Arkansas.
I've not. I know it just came out like last week. I've not gotten into it. It's on my watch list. I was busy wrapping up the semester, but it's number one on my streaming list. So I will get to it this week. Start it this weekend. But I've heard about it. I think it does sound like a very interesting social experiment if we are allowing people to, from what I've understood, allowing doors to be unlocked and people to kind of move around. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, the question that they were curious about is what your thoughts on are about building community or building community resources to help individuals, let's say, reintegrate back in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of that, and to kind of give you kind of a different perspective on it, several summers ago, I led a study abroad course, and I took students over to Berlin, Germany for 2 weeks, and we toured. I will wrap it back to this unlocked theme. We toured many mental health facilities and jails and prisons over in Germany, and it is night and day how their prisons and jails are set up. Doors are open, kind of like what we're talking about with this unlocked. People can kind of move around. Individuals actually in some of these facilities actually leave the facilities during the day to go to school, they go to work, and then they pretty much just come back to the facility at night to sleep. They're taught, some of them in the facility, actual culinary trades, where they're actually learning how to cook and prepare food. When we ate there, it's nothing compared to the food that we see here in the United States. What's really different there too is that they're what we call security officers. They're over there. They are trained more like social workers. So they have a mental health related training, and a good number of these security officers there will escort individuals maybe off site to school, to work, to ensure that they know how to get there, and et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually they'll be able to go kind of on their own without the help of, without an officer. And just there's much more mental health staff there as well, infused and incorporated throughout all the institutions. So it's being done, kind of this unlocked experiment's being done. It's unfortunately just not being done here. It's being done elsewhere. And we do know that Germany, Scandinavia, and some other countries over there are really at the forefront of correctional mental health, and just mental health, just generally speaking.
Yeah, it honestly seems like a whole bunch of different issues are coming together to kind of preventing us from giving people the appropriate treatment that they need. Comparing the United States to these European countries, you can also see the rates of incarceration are probably drastically different as well. So if we had lower incarceration rates and we had a little bit more justice on, the starting end of it, we wouldn't necessarily not have these resources for these people, because the numbers would be lower. So instead of 1,200 people for every 5, maybe 600 people for every 5. It's still not ideal, but it's significantly better than having 200 people per caseload.
Yeah, also too, just to your point there, also if we actually treated addictions like addictions and lock people up for addictions, we think about the dual diagnosis component. So many of these individuals are getting locked up because of addiction to alcohol or other substances, et cetera. And if we actually provided them appropriate addiction related services, whether inside or outside of these facilities, if we could just avoid, the number of people, if we actually provided the treatment as opposed to putting them in jail or prison, those numbers would be drastically reduced. Drastically.
Do you know anything about addiction relapse rates, or even withdrawal complications within prisons? Because I also understand that they might not necessarily get the appropriate amount of intervention when they first get incarcerated and they're addicted to substances.
Yeah, we see that where individuals are not provided the substance abuse related treatment right away. I think unfortunately then what happens is, for some of these individuals, they misuse substances because of their addiction. Maybe they will prey upon or steal medication from other inmates to cope with their own addiction or their own mental health related issues. That happens. So it becomes a greater security related concern. So it is a problem that needs to be addressed, and unfortunately it's not. Unfortunately too, a lot of these larger treatment needs, like if someone really needs to get addiction treatment, or someone needs to really get sex offender treatment, these wait lists are pretty huge, and the priority typically goes to the people who are going to be released first, because they want to ensure that people get it right. So if you get incarcerated and you're going to be in for, I'm just going to throw a number out there, 5 years, you might not get the treatment you need till year number 4, right before you leave, if you even get it. So that's a huge problem as well.
And, we talk a lot about community involvement. And one question that one of our producers had was, what are your thoughts on building a community behind the walls of jails and prisons?
What do you mean by behind the walls? I'm curious. What is meant by that?
So instead of necessarily making it so that, you know, you have people exiting, going to work and school like that, but you also have people entering. It's almost like building a community so that, you know, you have, let's say, a library there, and you can have like their children come and like read with them, for example, or,
Yeah.
you know, you can have a communal farm there where, you know, you have prisoners working on the farm because it's just part of what they do, but you
Yeah.
also have community members being involved and interacting with them, also reducing like the stigma of like, oh, these people are part of a prison, I don't want to go talk to them, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's ideal. I mean, that would be the pipe dream. I mean, if we could do that, because ideally, if we can get greater support around community so that it's a community-based effort, if individuals within the community are really advancing the needs while people are locked up, they're going to be more prone to supporting them once they get out. Because right now, there's that stigma, there's the fear of people going out and these people in the community have not had contact with them. All they know is, oh, they were released, they're an offender, they have a criminal history, I want to keep my distance from them. But they're not taking into consideration all the other factors that were involved. So yeah, I think this behind the wall situation, if we could do something like that, yes. But it would take a lot from the community to really get involved. And I think there need to be a little push, you know, politically as well to get something like that up and running and going.
And, you know, we're a couple minutes away from our big Q&A section where we're going to be taking in questions from different social media platforms. So I kind of wanted to wrap everything up. You've done a lot in terms of your own clinical work, in terms of advocacy, and now you're a professor and you're teaching the next generation of, you know, forensic mental health clinicians. So I was wondering, you know, first, why did you choose to become a professor? Why do you find it fulfilling? And what do you hope for your future students, basically?
Yeah. So I think one, I wanted to give back in a different way. I think I had been working in corrections for roughly 7-ish years full time. And to be honest, and this goes along with mental health and in particular working in correctional based settings, I mean, there comes a time when we start to get a little bit burned out within the kind of work that we do. And I knew I was not necessarily going to be as 100% effective if I kept staying in the setting that I was in. So I just wanted to change things up and still stay within working kind of within this forensic world, but in a different way. And if I can do it by teaching, why not? So that then, you know, I can really kind of help inform newer generations coming through who want to do this work, kind of my lived experience, best practices, and to kind of continue and be the new kind of generation and folks to really go out there and do this kind of work. So I think that's pretty much the reason why I really got involved in academia. Yeah.
And, you know, people who are first getting involved within, you know, the incarcerated population might have a lot of bias, and they might have a lot of anxiety and fears based on stereotypes and media representation. I was wondering if you could give, you know, people who are on the fence of like, I want to help, but I'm afraid of certain things, if you can give them a little encouragement to say, go ahead and try the thing that's scary.
Yeah. I think I always say you got to try something once. You gotta put yourself out there. You gotta, take a risk. And I think in this line of work, there's always going to be feelings of uneasiness or feeling uncomfortable. I feel that. I mean, if I were to go back into the jails and prisons, there's going to be times where I feel that way too, just because of who I am and the environment that I would be in. But I think if we don't take those risks, if we don't put ourselves in challenging, uncomfortable, we're never going to kind of move ourselves forward. And I think we need more people who can put themselves in uncomfortable, challenging situations to really help out those who are coming from these marginalized, under-resourced communities.
Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate the conversation we had and you answering all of the questions I had prepared. We are now in our Q&A segment where we're going to be opening up the discussion to questions from the audience or anyone else who may have any questions. Let me just get them up right here. So we already asked a few of them. One of them was, could you talk a little bit of the impact of unaddressed multi-layered trauma?
Unaddressed multi-layered trauma?
Yes. So like an intersectional trauma almost.
Yeah. I mean, that's what unfortunately, a good number of these individuals are, it's not just one trauma that they've experienced. They've experienced multiple traumas across multiple developmental periods. When we think about trauma, it comes in various forms. So we think about just abuse, whether it's emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, whether they've experienced it and or witnessed it, a combination of both. And a good number of these people who are within the forensic based, arena are going to experience multiple layers and levels of abuse as a witness, or actually personally being inflicted by that abuse. Whether it is trauma out on the street, witnessing acts of violence, in a lot of these communities, if they're involved in interpersonal violence, relationships, primarily intimate partner violence, domestic violence relationships, again, whether you're seeing it or witnessing it, bullying, whether it's at home, it's at school, it's on the street, accidents, being mistreated by law enforcement agencies, and just basic traumas where, just accidents. And I don't want to minimize accidents, but what I mean by accidents is, a bike accident, a car accident, hitting your head, trauma related to, alcohol use, accidents, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just trauma. It can be in a variety of different forms. And unfortunately, a good number of these individuals, it's not just one trauma that they've experienced. It's multiple levels, multiple traumas across the lifespan. Trauma, and you think about just general malnutrition, not having food, access to resources that you need to be, quote, healthy. That's traumatic as well, and that can stunt somebody's development as well.
Yeah, it seems like, not only are they traumatized before getting into the environment, but the environment itself kind of re-triggers and further traumatizes these individuals as well.
Right.
Just a double whammy. Not only are they not getting help, but we're somehow making them worse, which I don't understand why we're still doing that. The next question is, do you think that the culture of corrections impacts staff and their ability to remain productively relatable to those incarcerated?
Oh gosh, yeah. I think that's there. Because I think about corrections and working in corrections. It can be a daunting, depressing place. I'll be honest and transparent about that. And going in there day in and day out, and seeing individuals who could be hopeless, right? And who've experienced trauma or continue to experience trauma. It's challenging to see that on a day-to-day basis. And then for these staff members to work with and take that on, and then take it with them when they leave. We talk about it's kind of compartmentalizing for our own wellness and self-care, to compartmentalize and leave work at work, but it's too hard to do that, because you could be home and think about, like, what is so and so doing now while I'm not there, or and that really has an impact. So I think that does lead to overall burnout at the end of the day for staff, whether it's correctional officers, social workers, nursing, psychologists, counselors, etc.
The next question we're going to get to, but I had a question regarding to that. What are some strategies do you have to reduce burnout and that kind of like negative mentality that can probably build up and erode your perspective over time? Yeah.
So, two things. So I've got I kind of have two camps of friends. I've got my psych group and my non-psych group. So I have my psych group where we can talk about anything related to clients, patients that we're dealing with, obviously in a very confidential manner, but just to decompress with them, because we all know what it's like. And then I've got my non-psych friends. It's like, I'm not talking anything about my work. It's gone. We're not talking about it. So I think that's very helpful. So I've got those two different outlets. And I think for everyone, it's going to be something different, like with regards to how do we best kind of cope with it and how do we kind of, quote, escape. For me, it's throwing on the headphones and running. I'm a runner. I think that's really, really important, where I can kind of disconnect and just, for me, like in Chicago, running up and down the lake shore and just being by the water is really peaceful and helpful for me. I have a really great community. I'm a CrossFitter. I do CrossFit, and I have a really great community of friends that I've met through there that we kind of hang out with and are there to help through the life's challenges. I like to kayak. I like to be on the water. I like to occasionally binge watch something on, whatever the latest thing is streaming. Movie guy, like to listen to music. So for everyone, you got to find whatever it is, whatever that outlet is, to really disconnect, take care of yourself so that you can rejuice, re-energize to actually do the work the next day.
And it really does seem like nature plus movement is really something that we need to do, especially when it comes to this digital age where we're often forced to do a lot of things over the internet, and we don't necessarily give ourselves the opportunity to go outside and see the sun or just listen to the ocean or something like that.
I mean, we don't sometimes think about the intersection of physical and mental health enough, and how important it is. And then these phones are great, right? And they keep us connected to one another. But at the same time, I mean, these can also be very isolating. We can just I could sit here all day if I wanted to in my room and just scroll through Instagram, chat on my group chats, whatever it is. But some people, that's a great outlet for a while, and I don't want to diminish that by any means, but like social connectiveness in face-to-face is really, really important too. And I think we've really, particularly when we think about coming out, I mean, not to belabor this, but especially coming out of COVID, where we were disconnected for so long, and how that impacted all of us negatively for so long, and the isolation and mental health issues. I think we really need to sort of get back to effective interpersonal connections. There's a time and place for the phones and for the laptops and the gaming and all that, and the watching TV on our own. But I think we really need to think about how healthy interpersonal face-to-face interactions are as well.
Yeah, it really does seem like there needs to be a balance. No matter what your advice or strategy is, you can't do 110% that one strategy all the time. We have only a few questions left, and we're about to wrap up our show. One of the final questions that we had was, what are some strategies or interventions have you found to be effective in addressing and reducing stigma within mental health settings? And how do these interventions contribute to improved client outcomes?
Sure. I think so much of it is just preventative. When we think about how can we do preventative education, psychoeducation? I think it's just educating the general public. And for me, again, it was just really talking with security officers about just general mental health related issues, and educating them and making them more aware. Then they can have conversations with people. It's just slowly kind of having these small, intimate conversations with people, one-on-one or in small groups, about mental health and how best to work with people with mental health, destigmatize mental health. And we need to do a better job too within the public and within the media to really educate the public a little bit better. I think we need to educate the public not just when there's a big critical incident, but on a routine basis, so that we're not always associating mental health with these critical incidents that we see across the media so often.
And the last question we have before we give you an opportunity to talk about anything you want is, what do you perceive as, some of the underlying issues preventing the United States from transitioning into appropriate intervention strategies like Germany or other Scandinavian countries might have?
Oh gosh, we don't have enough time for that one. Right at the end, thanks. I think we have to look at our historical context on this one, and the political context and ramifications. When we think about again, not enough time, but when we think about our criminal justice system, it's rooted and based in racism and slavery, right? And our criminal justice system is an extension of slavery. And so here we have continuously kept people locked up, primarily Black men and women, right? When you think about comparison to Germany, that went through horrific World War II with the Nazi regime and the Holocaust, they don't want to be presently associated with that. So in Germany, they don't want to lock people up because of their horrible history with locking people up and incarcerating and exterminating people. They want people to be, quote, free. So they learned from the past in a very great way. We have not. And unfortunately, our criminal justice system is also a moneymaker. And so politics comes into play. And unfortunately, because of politics and the money making, and there's this whole fear mongering around people within the criminal justice system. And so if we can slowly move away from a system that's based in, quote, fear mongering, But it's a conversation we've had for years and are going to continue to have for years. And I don't know if and when we can actually resolve our criminal justice system here.
Well, once again, thank you. This is part of the process of resolving it, is having these conversations and disseminating information to people. Now we're going to give you the opportunity to give any announcements of any upcoming events or books or workshops that you might have. Any last minute thoughts that you want to give to the audience?
No, I just really want to thank everyone here today for having me here today and having this conversation and this dialogue. I think these are important conversations to be had amongst ourselves and with others. And so I really, again, appreciate the time and the platform to do this. And I'm more than happy to connect, chat, meet, have further conversations with anyone that was here today. And I'm sure you can always share my contact information as needed with anyone. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Again, thank you for having me here this morning.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to be taking a quick break, but then we're going to be doing another 15-minute masterclass afterwards. But I think we're done for now. There you go.
Excellent. This has been wonderful, wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you so much. Very insightful as well. Really much.
Thank you.
Kavan, outstanding. And I want to thank everyone who joined us for another installment of the Justice Beat Talk Show. We will be back for our last episode. This one will be with the Just Us Youth Talk Show. And we are looking forward to you joining us on April 27th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Take care and have a great weekend. God bless.
For listening to the Justice Beat. If you like what you heard and found the information useful, then support the Justice Beat radio show by spreading the word and telling a friend.